Hello, my name is Mr. Abbott, and welcome to today's lesson on complex sentences. This should be the third part in a three-part grammar series. Hopefully, you've gone over how to make complete sentences, how to combine sentences together, and now you're looking at the third part, the complex sentences and how they are punctuated. So, I have two sentences here. One of them is grammatically correct and one of them is not, at least as far as the writing goes. One of them says, I want a PS4 because it has the best games. The other one says, I want an Xbox One because it has a lot of processing power. Can you identify which one is properly punctuated and is properly grammatically correctly punctuated? Take a minute and think about it. Come up with your theory because we'll be checking this in a minute. Moving on, I want to go over two terms with you. I've mentioned these briefly in previous lessons, but now it's going to be really important to understand what an independent clause is. An independent clause could be a complete sentence all by itself. It does not need its dependent clause. It has a subject, a predicate, and makes a complete thought. What I haven't gone over is what's called a dependent clause. And this is a clause that could not be a complete sentence all by itself. It will not make complete sense without its independent clause. And it has a subject and a predicate, but it does not make a complete thought. It's very much like a sentence, but it's just missing, you hear it and you want more information. So you can think of these as like independent Irma. She knows what she wants. She can handle herself. She doesn't need anybody else. She can, she's all right on her own. Whereas dependent Donnie, is not going to make it on his own. He needs his mom there to help him. He needs some independent person to take care of him. And so when you look at two sentences, one is independent, where it could stand by itself, and the other one's dependent. It's like it's leaning on it. It needs the help of the main sentence to finish making sense. And so if I have the sentence, I ate an apple because I was hungry, I ate an apple is the independent clause. It could work by itself. You could pull it out of the sentence, and I ate an apple is still a sentence, independent clause. It has a subject, predicate, makes a complete thought. Because I was hungry would not. If you just said because I was hungry, people would be like, yeah, and it seems like you want to tell me more, right? I as the subject, was hungry as the predicate, but it doesn't quite make a complete thought, right? And so this is the difference between an independent and a dependent clause. And it's a little bit important that you know this because there's slight rules in punctuation based on how these are ordered. But what we have here are words called subordinating conjunctions. Some grammar programs will refer to them as SWABI, right? But subordinating conjunctions, what they do is you put them at the beginning of a sentence, and it turns what would normally be an independent clause into a dependent clause. And they're words like after, because, when, before, since, where, even though, until, while, if, unless, that, right? You're going to use because, if, and that a lot. The rest of the words you'll use somewhat frequently. But these are subordinating conjunctions. If you put them at the beginning of your sentence, you're turning your independent clause into a dependent clause. And so this is the first type of complex sentence. A type 1 complex sentence combines an independent clause to a dependent clause with a subordinator. And then subordinator is one of those dependent clauses, right? Or one of those words that makes a sentence a dependent clause. So a type 1 complex sentence has an independent clause and a dependent clause. So the ice cream sandwich was delicious because the vanilla ice cream was soft and sweet. So here we have the independent clause. The ice cream sandwich was delicious. That sentence would work on its own. You could make a sentence that just says the ice cream sandwich was delicious and people would get it. The second part, the dependent clause, because the vanilla ice cream is soft and sweet, if you said that, it has a subject, the vanilla ice cream. It has a verb and a predicate, which is soft and sweet. But because is here, it doesn't quite make sense on its own. If you were to just tell somebody because the vanilla ice cream is soft and sweet, they'd be like, yeah, okay, finish the thought. What else do you have to say, right? So this dependent clause doesn't really work unless the independent clause goes with it. And so they work together to create what's called a complex sentence. And this is different than a compound sentence because the complex sentence has one sentence as the main one and a second sentence that's like the supporting sentence. And so let's take a look. Can you identify the independent and dependent clauses below? You'll know the dependent clause because it'll begin with a subordinating conjunction. Take a minute. See if you can identify the independent and dependent clause. Feel free to pause this video. I'm going to move on in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here are the clauses. The oranges are the dependent clauses. The kind of pink salmon color, like a little bit of a, you know, burgundy, like a light burgundy. This part is the independent clause, right? Marvel was happy. That sentence will work by itself. Jasmine had 50-cent pencils. That sentence will work by itself. These are the independent clauses. Since her phone was fully charged is the dependent clause. If somebody were to just say that to you, you'd be like, okay, what? After she sharpened them, you know, people would be like, what? Okay, finish the idea. These dependent clauses don't make a complete thought, even though they have a subject and a predicate. Now, it's really these words at the beginning, the subordinators, the subordinating conjunctions, since and after, that are making them dependent clauses. In fact, if you were to take these words out of here, she sharpened them. That's a complete sentence if this word isn't on there. It's this word that makes it a dependent clause. And so if that's one of the ways that helps you identify dependent clauses, you could just notice that, oh, there's a subordinating conjunction, right? Here at the beginning of the dependent clause. And so here's the first rule I want you to remember when looking at a complex sentence. If the dependent clause comes first, put a comma after it. For instance, after he said something embarrassing, Homer disappeared into the bushes. The dependent clause comes first, so there's a comma after it. When the dependent clause comes second, you don't need any punctuation. Homer disappeared into the bushes after he said something embarrassing. And so if the dependent clause comes first, you must have a comma. If the dependent clause comes after the independent clause, you do not need any punctuation. You can just write the sentences together. So let's go back to that original example. I want a PS4 because it has the best games. I want an Xbox One because it has a lot of processing power. Which one is grammatically correct? Hopefully you're identifying that this blue box is grammatically correct. This one is incorrect because the independent clause, I want a PS4, comes before the dependent clause because it has the best games. And so since the independent clause comes before the dependent clause, you do not need a comma here. So same thing here. The independent clause, I want an Xbox One, because it has a lot of processing power, is the dependent clause. Since the independent clause comes first, you don't need a comma. But if you were to say, because it has a lot of processing power, comma, I want an Xbox One, that would be grammatically correct. And so there's a couple different IXL lessons you can use to practice this. And I'd recommend pausing this video, opening the video slides, and using the links in the video slides to practice these concepts on IXL. Hopefully you paused your video and you practiced the concepts on IXL and you're ready to move on to the second part of complex sentences. And so here is where it gets a little bit more tricky. What's the difference in meaning between these two sentences? People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. It's a real subtle difference. And if you're not a native English speaker with a lot of experience in the language, you might not even notice the slight difference between these sentences. But let's take a look at a different example. The duck that is wearing sunglasses is cool. The duck, which is wearing sunglasses, is cool. And so these two sentences have a slight difference, right? In this one, when I say the duck that is wearing sunglasses, I'm talking about, out of all the ducks here, which one am I talking about? I'm talking about the one that's wearing sunglasses. It's a way of specifying which duck I'm talking about. This one, there's only one duck. And so when I say which is wearing sunglasses, it's like extra information. I'm giving extra information about the thing that I was talking about. And so let's take a look at this. Let's see if you can figure out which one needs commas. The man who's in a pink kayak is winning. The man who's in a pink kayak is winning. So take a minute. Which one needs the commas? Which one is specifying the person? Which one is just extra information? The one with extra information needs commas. And so you should see that number one is the one that needs commas, right? The man who is in a pink kayak is winning. We're not referring to one man out of a lot. We're referring to this man. We know who it is, and who is in a pink kayak is just extra information, right? And so let's try this one more time. Students who do their homework are likely to pass their classes. Students who do their homework are likely to pass their classes. What's the difference between these two sentences? Well, in this first sentence, I'm specifically talking about students who do their homework. In this second sentence, it's implied that all students do their homework. And this who do their homework is like extra information, right? I'm not saying specifically the ones who do their homework. I'm talking about students. And by the way, all students do their homework, just thought you should know, are likely to pass their classes. And so it's a real subtle difference. And so this form of complex sentence can be tricky, especially for people who are not native speakers or who are, just not, uh, you know, uh, super exposed to a lot of English variety. And so this is what I call a type 2 complex sentence. And remember, a complex sentence has two parts. It has an independent clause that has a subject, predicate, and makes complete thought, and a dependent clause that has a subject and a predicate, but does not make a complete thought. And so if we look at this, let's ask ourselves, well, where are the clauses in this sentence? People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw a stone. People who, by the way, live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, right? Where are the independent and dependent clauses? It can be sometimes hard to find them in this sentence because the dependent clause is right in the middle of the independent clause. So people shouldn't throw stones is the independent clause. Who live in glass houses is the dependent clause. It's smack dab right in the middle of the independent clause. And this is a complex sentence type 2. It is used to either refer to a specific type of person or to give extra information about the subject of a sentence, or you could also refer to the object, but typically it'll be the subject of the sentence. And so remember, the independent clause is people shouldn't throw stones. The dependent clause is who live in glass houses, right? We put this dependent clause right in the middle of the dependent clause. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And so let's try this one more time. I always pass students who do their homework. I always pass students who do their homework. Where is the independent and dependent clause? Can you identify them? So you can see this kind of pink color is the independent clause. I always pass students. That would work on its own. It doesn't need the dependent clause. Who do their homework? That has a subject. It's who. Uh, do is the predicate, but it doesn't make a complete thought. It needs its independent clause. So this is a type 2 complex sentence. It joins an independent clause to a dependent clause using what's called a relative pronoun. Who, that, or which. Jose's phone, which is out of batteries, is charging on the wall. So here the independent clause is Jose's phone is charging on the wall, but then we use a relative pronoun, which, and a dependent clause, which is out of batteries, to refer to Jose's phone. And so here are some more examples. Let's move my video out of the way here. The girl who's wearing a beanie has two dogs. The cabinet that is in room C202 has lots of tape on it. I adopted a cat which isn't house trained. Can you identify the independent and dependent clauses here? And so we can see in pink is the independent clause, and the dependent clause is in orange. And you can typically identify it because it starts with that, who, or which. And so there's one rule I want you to remember here, and this is becoming less formal of a rule, especially in spoken English, but you should still be aware of it, and that is when you're referring to people, you use who. When you're referring to things or animals, you use that or which, right? So the man that wore the blue hat had the loudest voice. This is technically wrong, although now in a lot of informal English, you'll see this quite often. The man that wore the blue house hat. But you'll notice it when we refer to non-human things as who. It becomes really weird. The school who was founded in 1924 just got new carpets. This would sound very strange to a native English speaker, right? But the correct is the man who wore the blue hat had the loudest voice, and the school that was founded in 1924 got new carpets. And so it's okay if you're just speaking to your friends and you say the man that, but when you're writing formal English, you should say the man who. And so make sure you keep this in in your memory. And so now is a good time to practice commas with non-restrictive elements on IXL. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in class, and I will see you next time.